Well, I hope you're ready to think and use your imagination because my guest today is here to talk about the future and specifically how do we get the future right. Joining me is Dr. Cliff Bragdon, Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne, where he also serves as Executive Director of the Global Center for Preparedness. Welcome, Cliff.
Ma'am, please be here.
Dr. Bragdon also is a writer and has helped organize a 4-part lecture series here in Brevard that touches on 4 critical areas of our lives. Cliff, tell me a little bit about this lecture series because it's really interesting stuff.
Well, what we decided to do is look at where our culture needs to be not only now but into the future. And there are 4 building blocks that really make it really critical. The first is spirituality. Now, we're talking about society as a whole. We're also talking about the issue of health and poverty, which we're dealing with. We're also talking about educational imperative, how education is really going to be essential, as it has historically in our culture. And then lastly, we're talking about sustainability and really a new concept called resilience. So those are the 4 building blocks of this series. One started in September 20, and we're going to end this up on October 11th every Sunday.
And these are going to be at Holy Trinity Episcopal Church.
Holy Trinity Episcopal Church. The public is welcome. They start at 10:45 a.m. and they go approximately to 11:15.
Great. Well, you are on the schedule to talk about resilient communities.
Right.
What does resilient mean?
Okay, the best definition I like to use is it includes 3 elements. It includes safety, includes security, and includes sustainability or green communities. So resilience means it's all those things together. The example I like to give is this. We may have, and we are right now, our pollution level in the United States is down significantly for the 4th year in a row. But that deals with the greening of our environment. But how about how safe are we and how secure are we? So we can have a perfect carbon footprint, and we may have somebody desiring to blow up a nuclear power plant, a man-made disaster, or some kind of natural disaster. So we need to have those 3 things in sync. So resilient means all 3 of those things have to be working as one. We can't have one without the other 2.
How does business fit into a resilient community?
Business is critical because economic development is really how we work. And society needs to have business at the forefront of everything we're doing. And that's not only small business, but it's in the innovative area, but it's also large business like the Harris Corporation, Lockheed, Northrop, GE. All those need to be working in sync, but they need to be working in sync in these 3 areas. If they emphasize one without the other 2, then we have a potential threat to the way in which we're going to have economic survival.
You talk a little bit in one of the articles that you've written about planning communities in 3 dimensions instead of 2.
Right, right.
What does that mean?
Well, it's interesting. If you go home and look at your lease or your title to your property, it's written in 2 dimensions because it's an XY. It tells like this table. It's flat. It tells with what's wide and what's long.
Here are the boundaries of my property.
That's it. But your boundaries are 3-dimensional. You have an air right and you have a subsurface right. But a lot of people don't know that. In fact, most lawyers think in 2 dimensions. Most architects do. But what we need to do is look at all our resources. That means we have to look at what's above the ground and what's below the ground and look at property, not land use. Property is a 3-dimensional space.
Is anyone pushing this way of planning anywhere, or where have you seen that, or how do you get it started?
Well, I worked with Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor in New York, and his team asked me to look at, could we build a new Central Park? And they said, what would you do, Dr. Bragdon? I said, the first thing I do is look at rooftops. Rooftops is another dimension of space. So what's happened since then is city of Tokyo, Chicago, many cities are developing rooftop systems. So what I'm saying is we have to use all our resources 3-dimensional. In Japan, they're building not a skyscraper, but an earth scraper. It's 20 stories below the ground. So what I'm saying is we need to use all our resources in all our space. And if we do, quote, a land use plan, that's 2-dimensional. So we really have to move into 3-dimensional space. So I call it a space use plan.
I think a 20-story underground building in Brevard County might get a little damp.
It might be, but there are firms that actually work with water control that can build in the floodplain if it's carefully done.
You talk a little bit in one of your articles about infrastructure gridlock costing something like 6% of our gross domestic product. Explain that.
What's happening is our mobility system is broken. We've relied so much on the automobile. In fact, we call the United States a drive-through society. To give you an example how absurd we're living in some areas, we now have drive-through funeral homes. And we've gone beyond that. We now have drive-through facilities.
I'm assuming that's for the visitors.
For the visitors.
Okay, good.
Thanks. We have drive-through funeral homes. We have drive-through places to work on divorce settlements. And in Las Vegas, we have what we call the Little White Chapel for drive-through marriages. But right around the corner from the drive-through marriage is a place to get divorced. So just in Las Vegas, they have 100,000 marriages in a car per year that averages less than 10 minutes. So we're drive-through oriented, and we cannot do that in terms of our environmental sustainability.
You talk also a little bit about a concept that might be a little bit controversial, and that is putting communities on a diet or building communities that are on a diet or something. What does that mean? Well,
what we're saying is that we need to look at all the resources a community has. We're not talking about a Dr. Atkins diet for us individually, though we all should look at that privately. But what we're saying is we're using space accessibly. Let me give you an example. A water tower. A water tower is sitting out in an area, and what does it do? It does one thing. It provides water into the supply in terms of water pressure. But a water tower can have 6 to 7 uses in it. For example, it can be a microwave relay system as well as a water tower. It could be a museum. It could be a restaurant. It could be all kinds of additional things all built into one. So if you have 7 different uses on 7 different areas, what is your dwell time for driving, and really what that results in not only gridlock, because you're in your automobile too long. We average about 2 hours a day in our cars.
So you're talking about doing more with existing infrastructure, things like towers, water towers, things like that, where we can think about perhaps leasing space on those for cellular or relays or whatever? Okay, because I was going to ask you, what is the incentive for, I guess, us middle Americans to live in a community that's on a diet? You know, and for the elected officials who answer to us to go ahead and push forward with something like that.
Well, see, elected officials shouldn't be always pushing for new infrastructure. They should do what's called multiple use, joint use, and adaptive use of space. Those 3 terms should be in every master plan, and they should abandon land use plans and call them space use plans with those 3 ingredients. Right now we say, well, let's have new infrastructure in isolation from others. So if we're talking about transportation systems, we can't talk just about a roadway. We need to talk about ecumenical transportation or intermodal, linking an airport to a rail to a roadway, and so forth. So, but we think in terms of stovepipes, and stovepipe thinking is killing us in terms of our tax base.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other lecture topics that you've been instrumental in helping to organize here. Spirituality. Chaplain Norris Burks, who also writes a column for Florida Today, was the first speaker.
Oh, yes.
A church is one vehicle of spirituality. It's one vehicle of spirituality. It's where a lot of us find our meaning, Christianity. But when we're talking about a world, when we're talking about bringing a world together, we have got to determine what it is where people find their meaning. And you know, I find my meaning oftentimes in church, in a congregation. But sometimes I find my meaning in nature. And I really in love with nature. I like to go out for walks, and not here. It's really hot. But
why is spirituality an important part of a resilient community?
Well, spirituality means you have to have faith in yourself and faith in the future. Too much, we're critics of what we do so much that we don't think about, we don't dream. And what he does and what he did is he gets us into an emotional, positive looking at ourselves and a realistic look at where we need to be in a positive way. And we had a standing ovation for Chaplain Norris after it was over. People felt better about themselves, and they said to themselves, well, let's look into the future. Let's not be critics about it can't be done. Let's see how it can be done.
What are some of the things that we keep bringing up that get in our own way of having a good future?
Yeah, well, one of the things is what we should be looking at is the use of, let's say, transportation systems that can be shared transportation. In other words, how can we use the use of the bicycle? How can we use, instead of a second car, use an alternative means of transportation? We rely so much on personal benefit, we don't share resources that we need to share. And that's what's happening, what's called the zip car, the flex car, which is fractional ownership. That's what's starting to occur. And that's going to be a new term that you're going to see in the United States, fractional ownership, then rather than outright ownership of this, outright ownership of that, to share our resources in a way to save time, space, and energy.
You mean like having a bunch of smart cars parked on my cul-de-sac for my neighbors and I to share?
Well,
instead of us all having a car in a garage?
What's happening now is there are over 1 million cars that are available on a zip car basis. You get on your computer and says, well, my wife is going on a short trip and she doesn't need that.
Oh, so this is a real car?
It's a real car.
A Honda Civic or some other vehicle?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you put it into the computer and you go to a location and you return it to that. Now what's happening in Paris and Chicago and New York and others, we have loaner bicycles. You can take a bike and you take a trip anywhere on that bike over a certain length of time at almost no cost. So we're trying to use alternative means of transport to conserve the energy supply that we have and also to improve the environment and improve our own health.
One of the other topics that is going to come up is in the lecture series is world health and poverty.
Right.
We have a special speaker on that. Tell me about that.
You know, Ed Scott is one of the leaders, BEA, which he established, which is one of the leading corporations. He is giving and devoting his life now to having a better balance of humanity, and he's working on what's called the Global Millennium with the United Nations, which means how do we have a more and improved health benefits for the world, for all the countries. So he's saying to the rich countries, you have to take care of your brethren. You have to do certain things to help in that area. So he started a foundation with Bill Gates and George Soros to make, and Bono, to make commitments to improving all areas of the world, all countries in the world, whether it be in Africa, whether it be in Asia, whatever continent. And to me, he's going to be speaking this weekend on World Health and Poverty to give some of the lessons of what we're learning and how we need to outreach. So look at the G20 hearings that are taking place right now. They're trying to get a better balance of how the wealthier countries can assist other cultures in the world.
I know that getting ahead of flu and tuberculosis and AIDS around the world is something that people see as important to the health and security of the United States in a more interdependent world. Now the final one, the final talk is on October 11th, and that is on educational imperative.
Right.
That's Dr. Anthony Catanese, the president of Florida Tech.
Right.
How does education fit into all of this?
Well, education is really a foundation of where we are culturally. We can't transmit information in our ideas without thought, communication, and effective writing. What we know now is that over half the population doesn't graduate from high school. And those that do go on, a good percentage of them don't go through college. So we need to have a more literate population, which will be able to give directions to what we need to do in the illiterate population. And we're not saying we're illiterate, but we need to raise the bar to get up to closer to 75 and then 80 and then 90% of our population. So they can be contributors as opposed to being on a payroll of non-performance, which doesn't help our economy at all.
You obviously are in tune with what's going on in the country right now in terms of political debate. There's been a number of big issues that have come up. Healthcare, as for one, clean energy bills, cap and trade, and that kind of a thing. When you see the debate that's going on in this country about those topics, and it's pretty divisive.
Right.
How does that affect your outlook on some of the things that you're talking about?
Well, I have the philosophy the best way to predict the future is to create it. So we have to go beyond debate, though it's really critical, to look at what our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren are going to be inheriting. So in terms of health programs, we're desperate to have a very effective health program that is economically viable. And so that takes two disparate views and mixes something what I call a marble cake. So we have to be able to compromise. Conflict resolution is what we need rather than standing on position of ego. Egos we don't need. We just need to have a successful culture. So that's important. And certainly here's an issue on terrorism. We're just reading about the United Nations is having their G20 meetings and the potential threat. So if we turn solely to the environment and why it needs to be green, or solely to the health program, why it needs to be a healthy thing, what do we do about safety and security of our environment? So we have to be multidimensional. We have to be looking at these things collectively. And so that's why we have to dream, and we have to dream in multiple colors and multiple thoughts, so we have a coherent, integrated approach to how we live.
Let's talk about space just a little bit, because
Right.
that's such a signature issue and industry here in Brevard County. How would space fit into what you're talking about?
Well, space is really critical because we have finite space on this earth, even if we do subterranean, aerial, everything else. We proposed 4 years ago, when Winston Scott was head of that program for the state, to hold a program on planning the future of space flight. And that meant commercial as well as government. And what's happened is we dropped the ball in Florida, and what was happening there is the states of New Mexico and Texas and several others have picked up on that. So now we have to get back in the game and look at space as an economic enterprise that will be positioning ourselves both in terms of present tourism, but also in terms of future tourism and economic development.
Talk to me a little bit about the reaction that these ideas have gotten so far at the lectures at a church.
Right.
I think that's critical, because when I go to church and I look around, it's a pretty diverse group of people.
Right.
A lot of people on the right, a lot of people on the left, other people who are socially progressive, other people who are socially conservative.
Right.
How would you judge the response to this?
Well, just this first one with Chaplain Burks, when you have 350 people standing up and giving an ovation that lasted 2 or 3 minutes, shows that we are part of a large culture, whether it be by religion, by race, by age, by income. We are a family. And there's where we take our differences and we put them away, because the future of this earth is based on an integration of people's collaborative spirit. And his spirituality dealt with how we need to work as the family of man. And that's where we have to head to.
Tell me again about how people can go to see this
Yes.
series.
There'll be every
We're
Sunday.
about partway through.
Partway through, September 27th, October 4th, and October 11th, which are Sundays. They're at the Holy Trinity Episcopal Church, and they start at 10:45, go to 11:15. There is no cost to anybody attending, and we hope we'll have a great turnout. And we're making a DVD of these, so we can share these with the community, whether it be a university, a college, a high school, a Rotary Club, whatever group you want to talk about. We'll have these available. And we want to have a collective spirit here, and Brevard is on the right track. This church is the oldest church in the county. So we want to make a contribution back to the county.
Cliff, thank you for joining us today. Always interesting thoughts, and good luck with the lecture series.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's our program. We hope that you enjoyed hearing about our sustainable or resilient future, or at least what may be in store for us. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you next week, the future, right here on WBCC and FloorToday.com. Thanks for joining us.